Further ado, everyone, let's get our morning started. We've got lots of fabulous things to get done today. And with that, I want to introduce a good friend of mine, J.D. Lewis, who's going to be speaking to us today on South Carolina and the Continental Congress. Let's go for it.
All right, can you hear me okay back there? You gotta see if I need to get closer, or can I back up, or can you hear me now? All right, that means I'm gonna lean in. So we're gonna have a couple of things first. First of all, I want to thank Carol for inviting me here, and the SC 250 folks for their help in pulling this together this weekend. I want to thank all of you out there for missing your busy weekends and coming in here. It's a lot of camaraderie and everything. It's good to see everybody. We need to make a little more concerted effort to get a few young folks in here. For the longest time, I was the youngest guy here. Now we got, I'm kidding, I was nearly older. But we need to make an effort to get some more young folks in here. Every year, we got to keep doing this. All right, so first of all, you're going to say, wait a minute, I'm going to ask a quick question. Who's here not from South Carolina? So if you don't give a dang about South Carolina, you might as well go home. Because as you see, the title of this presentation is South Carolina and the Continental Congress. The Continental Congress spanned 15 years, 13 states, and they had over 300 delegates. The journals are over almost 2,000 pages long. Excuse me. And then you find out they summarized. So you look at it and you say, there's no way we cover all the Continental Congress. It is very difficult to cover all of South Carolina in the Continental Congress. When I started doing this, I said, well, I'm going to get out the journals. And there's 4 volumes of these. I've got 3 of them on the back, well 2 now because one is right here. And you're welcome to look at them. And I said, okay, I'm going to find something salacious about South Carolina in these journals. Because we've all heard stories that there was a lot of friction between some of the northern states and some of the southern states. And it's like, all right, I'm going to find it in this journal. Nope, they edited all that out. So nothing in there. So then I go to reading and digging into the research and I find out Edmund Burnett is the preeminent author on the Continental Congress. He wrote this book in 1940. This is a reprint with a 4-point font. My poor little eyes were just dying reading. So I'm going through here trying to find, all right, there's some good stuff in here, some salacious. Well, Mr. Edmund Burnett wrote it like it was poetry. And he's got flowery words, and the paragraphs are a mile long, and the sentences are a half mile long. And it's beautiful prose, but it's like, okay, what the heck's that got to do with the Continental Congress? Well, he ties it together at the end of each chapter, and you're like, dang, he could have said that in 2 pages. but that's a Southerner's way of looking at things. So, anyway, however, he does have some salacious stuff in here. And I'm like, dang, it was worth buying this book and getting it looked. And so you're like, okay, I'm going to corroborate it with some of the Southern journals to see what the Southerners had to say. And you find out that none of the Southern delegates to the Continental Congress kept a journal of being in the Continental Congress. Several Northern state guys did keep journals day by day, and the most prolific was John Adams. Okay, John Adams from Massachusetts. He had a daily record, and almost every quote in this book is from John Adams. And John Adams started off being a little snarky, and then he realized, I've better tone this down a little bit. So he got appointed, but he wasn't to start. There were two others from the north that kept a journal, and I don't remember their names, but one was from Pennsylvania, one was from New York, and you're like, dang, why didn't this others keep a journal? They didn't, but I found a few good things in there. So, okay, without further ado, we'll get going with the presentation. So as I said, this is about, oops, forgot this one. Doesn't work. It's South Carolina and the Continental Congress. All right. Hang on to your seats because we're going to go for a wild ride. If anybody knows JD, you got to have a little context. So I've got a short section to give you a little context of how this came about. You're like, how is this related to Francis Marion? We're at the Francis Marion Symposium. What does that do with Francis Marion? Well, guess what? All the delegates from South Carolina that went to the Continental Congress were elected by the first one was from the Provincial Congress. Actually, the very first one in '74 was done by the Committee of Safety. But the second one was sent by the Provincial Congress, which was convened in February of '75. Who was on the Provincial Congress? Oh, I think one of them was Marion. So Marion helped to elect the first delegates to the Continental Congress. Marion then became a soldier, and later on, in '82, he got elected to the Senate while he was still a soldier. He stayed in the Senate for 3 terms, and during those 3 terms, he elected the delegates he helped along the way. So that's my tie-in to Marion, just so that we keep it legal here at the Francis Marion Symposium. But I think you're going to find this to be interesting. If you find it boring, get up, go, walk, or what have you. I don't think you will. But there's never going to be a test on this. I used to come here with CD-ROMs to give to everybody, but most people don't have CD burned or anymore. It's online at my website. This presentation, you can download it if you wish. And you just go to South Carolina and then Congress member. And you'll find it in there. And there'll be a page called the Continental Congress. You can download it from there free. It's an Adobe PDF file. And you can give it to your children, your grandchildren, or just tell them about it. It's all free. All right. So you see, I always have a table of contents. We're going to talk about the various congresses. We're going to talk about the South Carolina delegates to the various congresses. I'm going to show this, but I'm going to show this very quickly because you're going to see why I had to sort of change my tactics on what the presentation was going to be, because I was really going to do it based on this, and I had to change it a little bit. So, go forward. No, this is not a tutorial. I'm not a teacher. I couldn't qualify as a teacher, although I wanted to be one until I figured out what they got paid. I said, if you can do, if you can't teach, if you can't do or teach, you go consult, because you make bigger bucks. So that was my philosophy. So Congress came into English in 1350 to 1400, and it's a coming together mostly to discuss and resolve problems. They did not use this term very widely in English, because if you remember, the Brits were conquered by William Conqueror, and that was all French folks, and they instituted French policies and procedures. They had Parliament, and they started using the term Parliament in the 1350s. From the 1350s on, they didn't have a Congress, so they didn't need this word very much. It wasn't that important to them. The next one is Confederation. So there is a distinction between the two. One is to discuss and resolve problems, kind of like our government today. And common defense is the reason for the Confederation. They became popular in the 750s forward. So, quick background. In 1643, a Confederate alliance of Massachusetts Bay, Plymouth, Saybrook, and New Haven to defend against the American Indians. The movie Confederation. It was dissolved after several charters were revoked in the 1680s. It didn't last very long. The Dominion of New England. Why didn't I define Dominion? Because I didn't care. So it was, but it was a total control by the crown, and it was an administrative. So there were some precedents to our American Congress, and that's the point of it. 1754, they had the Albany Congress, and this was an intercolonial government that Benjamin Franklin first introduced in 1751, and right before this Congress, this is when he created this state. And you'll see there's some missing, but he lumped 3 or 4 into New England. So, that's all it is. All right. Nope, I got 2 more pages, forgot. All right, so 7 colonies met in Albany, and they negotiated with approximately 150 Iroquois Indians, and they had hosted several treaties. The chairman who was here are listed there, and this was called by the crown. So Franklin proposed this in 51, but in 1754 the crown said, let's do it. And so we've got some precedent for Congress. All right, page 3. So they debated Benjamin's plan, and they called for a union with a president to be appointed by the king. Each assembly would send 2 to 7 delegates and what have you. So it basically, there's a whole thing on the web about that, but it was rejected by the colony's legislature. You got to remember, every colony had their own governor, they had their own general assembly. Some had two parts, some had single unicameral assembly. All the assemblies said, nay. All right, Stamp Act, Congress. So the Stamp Act, we've all heard about the Stamp Act, the Stamp Act. So we're getting you to lead up to the Revolution and to the creation of a Congress. But after the Stamp Act was issued, the locals pulled together and came up with a Stamp Act Congress. So there's an example of the Stamp Act. But there were other acts that really ticked off the colonies. And so it wasn't just one thing. They considered all these in this Congress. And they were formed in 1765 to oppose the act. Massachusetts led it, okay? And as you can see, not all of them joined in, but guess who did? South Carolina. There's all the delegates, there's the name of it. Ooh, does that one look familiar? Does that one look familiar? Does that one look familiar? This is 1765 that they pulled together. They alternated. And it lasted for only about 18 days. Virginia and Georgia assemblies were deliberately prevented by their government. New Hampshire chose not to send, etc. North Carolina, William Tryon prorogued his assembly for other reasons, and nobody there did anything for this. So, not going to read all this, just let you know it's there when you want to download it, but this is the Declaration of Rights and Grievances that they put together in 1765. If you read through all this, you will see taxation without representation. That was their biggest beef. They had some other beef, but it was taxation without representation. So you wonder why that became such a big deal. And there were many colonists in the 13 colonies, And just for clarification, Delaware was not officially a colony. It was 3 counties of Pennsylvania that had their own General Assembly, separate from Pennsylvania. They didn't have a formal name or a governor or anything else, but they became a state in 1776. So from nothing to a state, they didn't have a colony. So anyway, there's all the items. Over the next few days, they drafted 3 documents, an address to the king, a memorial to the House of Lords, and a petition to the House of Commons. So they were sent on 2 ships. I'm not going to read all that, but the bottom line is they said, enough is enough, pay attention to us, don't ignore us, don't kick it up down the road. And this was in 1765. So, it's generally viewed as one of the first organized and coordinated political actions of the American Revolution. They weren't focused on independence yet. They were focused on don't tax us, okay? So that was it. Intolerable rights, I won't talk about it in a minute. We all know about the Boston Massacre. And this is one of the events that the 250th Commission said is the start of the American Revolution. So that's why you see 1770 to 2020. There you go, I can add. Anyway, they had the Townsend Act, they had, which caused some of this. 9 British soldiers shot several of a crowd of 300 to 400. And he prompted others to fire. The gunfire killed 3 people and wounded 8 others, 2 who died after their wounds. And if anybody here on social media, thank you, I'm not the only one. All right, so if you go on social media like Twitter or Truth Social or Getter or what have you, it's kind of dumb. But you're going to see that picture right there about 1 million times because they're like, don't tread on me. All right, let's see if we can just go over here. The Intolerable Acts was a combination of 5 acts. And this was the King's and Parliament's response to the Stamp Act Congress and what they had sent the letters to. You say, why does the Quebec Act matter? You got to remember, this is a continent. And the people that lived here were very well aware that it was a continent. They knew that Canada had already been named and existed, and they were trying to get Canada to join us, be part of our group. And so the Quebec Act really ticked a lot of Canadians off, but they finally chose, we don't want to join you guys. So that's the context. We're up to 1774, and you find out, okay, there's a lot of discontent in the American colonies. There are those who are Great Britain. Wasn't the United Kingdom yet, it was still Great Britain. But then there were some that were anti. And of course, there's always the middle of the fence who don't care and don't vote. So, the Congresses. There were 3. And they went on for 15 years. So, at the time of the very first one, which was September 5th of 1774, it was simply known as the Congress. Because none of the provinces had actually held their own except for 2. One of them was North Carolina, and I don't remember the second. But anyway, up until that point in time, there were no other Congresses. So the first one, they called themselves the Congress. When the individual colonies started creating their own provincial colonies, Congresses. North Carolina started in August of 74. South Carolina had theirs in February of 75. And then it had another one later. Each state began to start creating their own Congresses, provincial Congresses. That was when they backfilled field, all the nomenclature said, ours is the Continental Congress. And from that time on, about 1775, middle of 75, they said, this is the Continental Congress. And the one we had last year was the first. So that's how I got named. The first Continental Congress was only about 7 weeks in Philadelphia. The second was from 1775 to 1781. And you're going to quickly find out why. But they had to move because now they were in the middle of a war. So they started out in Philadelphia. They had to move to Baltimore. They came back to Philly, went to Lancaster, PA, went to York, and then back to Philadelphia. The Articles of Confederation. If I want to read the Articles of Confederation, I got them. They're pretty cool. So that was for the Second Continental Congress, and so you can see it went almost 6 years. After they got the Articles of Confederation, they officially renamed it to the Confederation Congress, and it went on for another 8 years. They again had to change places, change locations, but now it wasn't because of the war. It was because of smallpox, yellow fever, little things like that, plus, bad drinking water in one town. So they, all right, let's go to Princeton. Nope, let's go to Annapolis. Wow, we're going to Trenton now. We're going to New York, New York, New York, New York, Philadelphia, New York. And then in '89, they had called one, and only one delegate showed up. So I don't know if we really called that one or not. Anyway, there were many congresses. So the first Continental Congress was about taxation without representation. So what is the relation between the colonies and the mother country? What should it be? And in short, the colonies reached that stage in their development when they felt that they no longer had the need of a doting parent, and they resented subjection of a domineering one. That's this guy with the fancy prose. Anyway, it was a good turn quote, so I'll put it in there. All right, so that was held in Philadelphia at Carpenter's Hall, in case you care. It was called General Congress for bringing about a united action. 2 town meetings were held in other places. The Virginia House of Burgesses met, the Massachusetts House met, they elected 5 delegates, and then here's when all the others elected their delegates for this first Continental. South Carolina had a Commons House, which was under a royal government, and they approved delegates on August 2nd. They were next to last. Oops, put back one. So, as you can see, there are, from top to bottom, that's the order of this. There's New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, which was really just the 3 counties, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. So it's not in date order, it's just in down the coastline. They elected Peyton Randolph for president, except for the last 5 days he got sick. And boom, ta-da! Henry Middleton was president for a day. Well, 5 days. So Henry Middleton of South Carolina led that Continental Congress, and he is the one that signed all of these letters to the king and to Parliament and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, you done good, kid. So anyway, Georgia didn't join because the Loyalists greatly outnumbered the Patriots at that point in time. No Georgia. Sorry, Molly.
Sorry.
Okay.
We have to screw it up for everybody.
So there are 56 delegates at Philadelphia City Tavern. Oops, back to the microphone. And their original objective was to address the intolerable acts, okay, because they were being punished again. They closed the port of Boston until the destroyed tea was paid for. They took away Massachusetts' ability to control its own government. They allowed for royal officials to be tried back in Great Britain, and they forced Americans to board British troops in unoccupied buildings. Look, that act we didn't care about. So they were well aware that they were the North American continent, and they encompassed only the East Coast. They did consider themselves as Americans. This sort of blew me away, but they knew that this continent was North America and we had South America. I didn't know that they actually, it's like, I'm a South Carolinian, I'm a North Carolinian, I'm a Massachusetts. What's the version of that for Massachusetts? Where's Karen McDuck? What are people from Massachusetts called?
Bay Staters.
Bay Staters.
Bay Staters. I didn't know that. So we learned something else today. Thank you. And so, you know, the thing is that they did consider themselves to be American. They did not consider themselves to be British. Now that just blew me away. All right. We're going to go quickly. They broke into two main groups from the very beginning. This is not political parties. This is just people who considered themselves to be conservatives, who wanted to patch things up, and then the radicals were determined upon resistance. So, which one would South Carolina be in?
Conservative.
South Carolina was among the radicals. Unbelievable. Along with Massachusetts. South Carolina, Virginia, and Massachusetts were very much for to hell with England, let's secede, let's whatever. You know, North South Carolina was very good at seceding. They loved this concept. So they were considered a radical. The conservatives were New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and several others. But it's like, that just blew me away too. I'm like, we're radicals, man. So, their purpose was to redress the grievances, establish their rights and liberty, define commercial imports and exports, and then the cessation of arbitrary taxation, and restore harmony with Great Britain. Not one word about independence. In the very first Continental Congress, they were interested in reconciliation, but what do we do next? So they wanted a president with little power. They appointed delegates to committees, and then all the president did was to open and adjourn daily sessions. So he was just an order taker. Colonies to have one vote. They sent 5 delegates. Why can't they vote 5 times? Nope. Kind of like our Senate now. So this was to ensure that the small colonies had a voice. John Rutledge offered a timely reminder. So you're going to find out real quick why I didn't use letters from each of the South Carolina delegates. I originally thought there were 4 to 5, maybe 8. There's a lot more than that. So it's like I could not dig out all of those. So I said, all right, we'll get that. But I did find one quote from Rutledge. This Congress is only a body of representatives and ambassadors, as it were, gathered for consultation and counsel. We have no legal authority, and obedience to our determinations will only follow the reasonableness, the utility, and necessity of the measures we adopt. They passed no laws. They passed resolutions. And resolutions were like, we don't care. It's not a law. I don't have to follow that unless I want to. So, the fifth decision was appointing 2 committees, statements of rights, and then the statutes that affected trade and manufacture of colonies. They wanted to continue being the suppliers of the world. America was already the breadbasket, not quite totally, but they were very much so, for all of Europe, even way back then. And they wanted to keep trade. So they were worried about what are our rights and how do we keep our trade going, because as Mr. Truesdale said yesterday, we're capitalists and we like it. So, each of these set up in, they also consider these other actions. This is all in there in case you want to know. Silas Dean from Connecticut wrote, "We had a grand entertainment at the State House. Plenty of everything eatable and drinkable, and no scarcity of good humor and division." So, they partied at night. And I'm reading through all kinds of things that's like, they drank a lot. And it's like, wow, they can hold their liquor. So, they agreed to a non-intercourse resolution. And so, this was debating what can we export, what can we not, what can we import, what can we not. And so they issued a resolution. So when it came to non-exportation, South Carolina threw in one big demand. You gotta give us an exception for rice and indigo, because that is our way of living. You notice there's no mention of cotton. Cotton was not big yet. But anyway, rice and indigo, South Carolina held firm on, but finally Christopher Gadsden said, "Oh, the hell with indigo, it ain't that big, the market's going down now, but we'll just insist on rice." So all they did was insist on rice. So it would be called the association, and the appointment for carrying all these into effect in a committee. That's another word you're going to learn a lot about, committees. Boy, this group, that's all they knew how to do was to assign a committee. And there's thousands of them. So, anyway, they sent their address to King George. They decided, okay, we need to send one to the people. And then they approved the Declaration of Rights. And the Earl of Chatham later said that all these were admirably drawn. Articles of Association, not going to read all this, but it wasn't very big. There were only 3 pages, including 53 signatures. These are scans of them. Now had a united purpose to act together in their common interest. 12 united colonies. It threatened to ban export ban on any products going to Britain and West Indies. Okay. Again, I'm not going to read all these. You can download it and read it. But these are the actual articles of association. And there are all the signatures. So you see that South Carolina, you're like, okay, I recognize all of these things. Reminder, this was merely an agreement to assist and defend each colony, and it was not a government. They were not interested at this point in time, 1774, of developing a government. They just wanted to be heard. So here are their Declaration of Rights, entitled to life, liberty, and property. Dang right. They go on. In the event that the intolerable acts were not lifted, Congress decided to meet again next year. So we've done our job. We got 3 things out. We sent a letter to the king. We sent a letter to the people of England. They actually sent a letter to Parliament. And they agreed to have a non-importation, non-exportation of a certain thing. The aftermath. It's pretty much what you would expect. George III never even responded. It was the Articles of Association that enraged him. The New England government are now in a state of rebellion. Not South Carolina, just New England must decide whether they are subject to this country or independent. They learned that the British ministry had no intention of meeting their demand, and they started the boycott. They had started it on December 1, but it increased steadily in spring of '75. Tensions began to rise. The Parliament passed a restraining act. It's like, you come at us, we will. And it was tit for tat. And you're like, that sounds familiar. Anyway, You all know about the shot that was heard around the world. That changed everything. And all 13 colonies began assembling and organizing their militias. And Massachusetts and New York pulled together 12,000 men immediately after the battle for Lexington. All right, that's the first Continental Congress. Second Continental Congress, I'm going to go quicker. It did meet in different places because of the war and because the British Army was threatening. The colonies began to organize themselves first. So here are the dates when you see in 75 that they were already into their second. The Committee of Safety created something like gave the direction. The reason I got this chart up there is that each colony sent their delegates with instructions. You can do this, you cannot do that. You can say this, you cannot say that. You cannot approve any resolution for independence. Almost every colony had that in their instructions. They did not want independence from the official provincial colonies. So this one was the Committee of Safety, the General Assembly, and the governor. It turns out this governor was already sympathetic to the Patriot cause. First Provincial Committee of Safety, First Provincial Committee of Safety, Fourth Convention of Maryland, the Second Provincial Congress, First Provincial Congress, and that they had one finally in January. So they convened before the second one to elect delegates and to launch new governments and decide where they were going independently. That was the first step. The second step was when they reconvened was a centralized government was launched. So by the time it convened, hostilities had already broken out, shot heard around the world. The Congress agreed to coordinate military response and appointed Washington as commander of the American militia at the time. And the first half of 1775 was focused on reconcile with England or independence. And that was the first time they started talking about it openly, but they were all hush-hush with independence, not mentioning anybody else. It was all very frowned upon. Planned for treaties with other countries. France, Spain, Tuscany. Where's Tuscany? That's northern Italy. They wanted treaties. So they decided early in 75 that we need commerce and we need partners to trade with and we need people to sell us guns and ammo if we need. So the third was what kind of confederation to establish. And all they wanted was plans. This Congress had an original goal just to come up with plans. Not to implement them, but to come up with the plans. Like, we need a plebiscite to come up with a red team, to do a tiger team, to come up with a possible idea of a list of things that somebody else might want to consider. I'm like, dang, I've been in that too long. So after that, for most of 75, Congress debated, and the Continental Army actually was created by that time, and they fought 10 engagements, including the Siege of Boston and a couple of others. During 75 and 76, the debate was whether to blame King George or to blame Parliament. In January of 76, bing bada boom, a former Englishman who had come to America in 1774 and settled in Philadelphia, Thomas Paine had been a proponent of the American dream before he left England. He got to Philadelphia and he said, he read about all the ongoings of the earlier Congress, and this year he said, you guys are idiots. You have to have independence. And here are the reasons why, laid out in beautiful, succinct, not flowery prose, but He thought he would sell about 500 copies. It was a 47-page pamphlet that was paper, not hardbound like this one. You can buy these hardbound for $10. You can get them in paperback for $5. So if you're ever interested in the book Common Sense by Thomas Paine, he sold over 100,000 copies in 6 months. The Congress bought over 5,000 copies and sent them out to every general and field officer in the Continental Army. And from January 76 to the fateful day of July 4, this pamphlet swayed American sentiment away from reconciliation to independence. And it was just this little pamphlet. I mean, there were other things going on. There were other people pushing different agendas, but that pamphlet had the biggest effect on the whole state, country. So, they successfully managed the war effort, and they drafted and ratified the Articles of Confederation, which is essentially the first year of the Constitution. And as I said, you can buy these online for about $10 too. And then the Constitution. So, they secured diplomatic recognition and support from foreign nations, and that their goal was, and a good start, resolving state land claims. And so it's like some states said we go all the way out to the Pacific Ocean. And how did all the new states get created was because this Congress convinced them, if you ain't using it, you give it to us, so we can parcel it out. And that's how it came about. Did I go too far? No, I went too far. So they were a provisional or temporary government. This is a true government, and they drafted and issued the Declaration of Independence, and they continued to provide leadership until a new Congress, the Articles of Confederation. So that went the wrong way. So this is what the unicameral government looked like. A weak president, and oh, by the way, so this is from 75 to 81, 6 years, they had 3, 4, 5 presidents, and Henry Lawrence was one, for about a year and a half. So Henry Lawrence from South Carolina. The Secretary of Congress had more power than he did, because the Secretary of Congress could summarize the journals and not put in things that he didn't want to put in. And one thing that I learned after digging into all this was these were published very early after creating them in hardbound books. And you find out that this version is from 1817, and there are later versions of whatever. They had a secret journal because they had 2 secret committees. And the secret journal is not included in here. And I'm digging around. So as you guys know, I do most of the work out of my house. I do it out of books and the internet. And you dig on the internet, you find the secret journals. I forgot to download it. I went back 2 days later, it's gone. I'm like, dang, why didn't I get it the first time? And I've spent 3 more days digging, trying to find it. I don't know if anybody, you guys know about the website called JSTOR. I hate those people, because you got to have a darn college campus ID to get in there. I'm like, why? If the college guys can get in there, why can't I? Well, I can't get in there, and they got a lot of good stuff. You're like, dang, I don't have to get in there. So anyway, they did create a Secretary of War. They did Foreign Affairs, a Superintendent of Finance, which became the budget vote. They later created a Board of War that sort of reported to this person who oversaw the Continental Army, but the oversight was mostly, let's approve this general, let's approve this field officer, let's come up with a new way for designing what the commissary department should do, let's come up with a new way for how the logistics people should do. So they didn't really run the war, they just supported General Washington. They came up with a Marine Committee, which did evolve into the Department of Navy. So they did some really good stuff with just a single branch of government. They didn't have a Senate, they didn't have a House, they just all got together. Go quicker. All right, so here are the key South Carolina resolutions that happened, plus some events. Events meaning like the Battle of Camden. All right, so we know the Battle of Kings Mountain, the Battle of Cowpen. So this is all from the Second Continental Congress. These are witnesses to dates. They created the Continental Army, unanimously elected. These are the exact dates that came in that affect South Carolina. They weren't just South Carolina things, but for example, they did elect Henry Lawrence as president. He served until blah, blah, blah. So they ratified the first treaty with France. They came down and did all these things. At the time, this Congress had to approve all generals and all field officers. There was a point in time where they had to commission captains, but they got rid of that because it was too onerous. So they gave Washington the right to create captains and commissioners. But all field officers and generals had to be approved by this district. Approved Nathaniel Greene. Boom, boom, ta-da, Declaration of Independence. These are all the signatures, and of course you can see that I can't copy the signatures, but I decided, okay, since he wrote it so big, I'll make it big too. John Hancock was the president. He was not a delegate. He had been, but he was the president at the time. And so he signed it first, the big one. I said, well, probably I'll do it in the middle, but I can't. The Articles of Confederation, here's the date when each state ratified it. It came in early, South Carolina, in 78. But look at this, 78, 79, 79, 79, 78. What the heck's wrong with Maryland? Nota bene. Maryland held out because they didn't like this Congress. They didn't agree with the precepts, the concepts of the Congress. But finally, enough arm twisting, they finally got it approved on February 2. It became effective in March. And as you can see here, the South Carolinians involved in it. Now you got 6 guys. So, summary of each article, and if you're online, you can click here to get the complete transcript in PDF format. There's the rest of it. We're now up to the Confederation Congress. They didn't have to move because of war. It was all because of the things I mentioned before. February the 28th, they were in the Second Continental Congress. March the 1st, they were in the Confederation Congress. It was the same people. The same people from one day to the next, it just became effective. And they made March 1st. They continued to provide leadership until a new Congress, elected under the new Constitution, was ratified in 1788. Over the following 8 years, all right, 81, 82, we were still at war. So they were a war Congress. 83, we were already working the Treaty of Paris, so there was no real war going on in 83. So from 83 to 88, they didn't do much of nothing. Sorry, guys. They got elected as delegates, and they go up to Philadelphia, and they say, oh, dang, let's go over to the Eastern Shore for a weekend. Let's go up to the Catskills for a month. And so, dang, you go through 2,000 pages of the bloody journals, and you're like, oh my God. They were nitpicking about whether to cross the I or dot the T. And you're like, and then they go on vacation for a month. That's why I'm not going to do this one very far. All right. Most of the resolutions they passed were in their own self-interest. So the keys, South Carolina, Hobkirk Hill, Utah Springs, British Army evacuated Charleston. To me, this is the true date of independence for South Carolina when the British Army left. The Treaty of Paris was signed, Congress ratifies it, the Northwest Ordinance is passed, Constitution is ratified, boom. So that's that. The aftermath. The Constitution, as you can see, here's when each state ratified it, and they considered it to be in effect when the 2/3 of the states voted. So that's the official date of the Constitution, but 3 others came later, and South Carolina was in the middle. And what this made up was, here is the line of treaties from earlier, but this is considered, now America says, all right, Canada, you can have all that, but this is all ours. Except this. So the first election was held from 1788 to 1789. Washington was, of course, and this was the only U.S. president election that took 2 years to create a president. Some of them now kind of feel that way. All right. So you say, who were the delegates? This is in chronological order and at location. So I'm not going to read all these, but you can see this is the Continental Congresses all the way up to the Articles of Confederation, and when they took their seat, the names, where they were, etc. South Carolina. The title of this presentation is South Carolina and the Continental Congress. So for the Confederation Congress, which went on a little longer, effectively this was the end of the war. So here are the guys post-war, and when they were elected and when they served. Boom. Now that's an alphabetical order. You can see there were 29 delegates over a period of 15 years. You can research all of them and look for what you want online. Ta-da! We got photos of all of them except a few. Well, portraits. Photos of portraits. Actually 3, sorry. 1, 2, 3. We cannot find photos of them. So we're going to task the 250th Commission to enter a page on their website that says, here are things we're looking for. We want 3 photos, get them out to us so we can add them to this presentation or wherever we are. So as you can see, this is again sort of in chronological order, but we got pictures of them all. We've got signers of the Declaration of Independence. This guy was elected at the very end, but he never attended. So it's like, all right, I don't know whether he was really a delegate or not, but I'll include him. These were elected, but they chose not to serve. But Pierce Butler was reelected, and he did serve. So all the rest did not. So there were 35 elected, 28 or 29 served. Now you get a quick bio of every one of them. So you can see what they were involved in, who they married, what their children's name are. Some of them, there's not much information. Which delegate they were. Christopher Gadsden, boy, he was an ornery old soul. I sort of think I'm reading Carthage again. Daniel Hugh J. Hudson. So Ralph Izzard is kind of an anomaly. I'm not sure he was truly a delegate, but he was minister to Tuscany. So that was in 1767. So yeah, he came back. Anyway, minister to Tuscany from South Carolina. John King, president of the Second Continental Congress for a year and a half. Amazed that we could find these pictures. Thomas Lynch, Sr. and Jr. This is the one that got lost at sea. John Matthews later became governor. Got Arthur and Henry Milton. Isaac Mott. Wasn't he from Orangeburg area? All right. So we got John Parker Jr. He is known by most people as John Parker IV, and it's very confusing to figure him out. But then you know Charles Peachey, David Ramsey, Jacob Reed, Edward Rutledge signed the Declaration of Independence. John Rutledge, you saw him at Albany in 1754. No, no, he was at the Stamp Act Conference. But he was an attorney in Charleston and a planner in Fort County. He was also in the Congress twice. He was also governor of the state of South Carolina, and he was also Supreme Court Justice later for the United States of America. So we had some really movers and shakers up there. All of them really were. So that's it. So now, I'm not going to read these. I'm going to scan quick. It's just a point of what's in here. So the journals can be online from the Library of Congress, and they printed them in this big length of time, and it's a rework. There are 30 some, and I've only found 24 of these. But all these are parsing out pieces of this. So it's simply the same thing. All right. Of these journals, I could only find 3 to buy. 4 of them I can't find, but I found all 4 online in the WPDF, and they are in my website if you want to download them. But there are volume 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's 2,900 pages of information, 191 pages of index. So, South Carolina topics. But my initial walkthrough on this, and this is quick, I wanted to go through this in the index and pick out everything about South Carolina and note it down. I did that. And I said, dang, thank you very much. Well, the point I'm telling you is this was a 3-pronged attack on doing it. I went through the index first, noted everything down. I said, that can't be all of it. So I finally had to go through it page by page. And their indexing sucked. That's all I can say. So from the index, you've got 588 pages, and here's where they are identified on. Then you can see some SC topics on these pages. And then you see, okay, Gaston was seated on so-and-so, he was reelected. So all these points are in these journals and are found in the index. And volume 1, that's all was found. So it's like South Carolina gets 3 more battalions of foot on 11,475. 3rd Regiment Rangers on the Continental line, 88 battalions. This is volume 2. So now we've got a few different players with a few more topics. So there's all the topics that they were indexed. Here's all of the South Carolina topics that I found in the index. Volume 3, a few more players, but it gets a little longer. And then you see, okay, that's all we found for Thomas B. And that's the picture I got is at Houston. I couldn't find a photo. Anyway, all we have is when he was seated. You're like, wait a minute, he was not a delegate at this time. He was the Deputy Postmaster General for South Carolina. All right. Getting out of that quicker. Here's all the topics for volume 3, 88 battalions, 6 for South Carolina. Benjamin Lincoln is now coming down the line. You see here is a long span of nothing. A few more items for volume 3, volume 4, there's a few more people. Very paltry items in the index. Again, so here's the rest of the story. The previous index came from in the index, and this section is by scanning every page. So you'll see that this is volume 1. Volume 1, I found a whole lot more that was not in the index. Volume 2, I can't read it. Volume 3, all the items that I found, and then, wow, volume 3. And none of this was in the index. Point that I wanted to make, I forgot to mention that they were appointed to a committee to report on the memorial of and a letter from, and then Congress approved the payment for services rendered in their life. You recorded that in the thing on? You hear me? No, it's not on. That sounds like it's dead. No. Okay, so anyway, this is what they reported in the journal, and they're like, I wouldn't have bothered. Give me the secret details. Anyway, that's just me. So volume 3, volume 4, there's a whole bunch of volume 4. Almost done. Thank you.
This lady is
Okay, volume 4, we're almost done. Last thing, this is the last thing, the floor vote. And then you're learning about floor votes. During the first session, they didn't really keep floor votes. They didn't keep records. In the Second Continental Congress, 75 and 76, they didn't start reporting them until about the second year. So it's like, you don't know who voted for what. You just knew the outcome of a resolution. It was approved, it was not approved. But then they started doing floor votes, and there were none in this one. In this one, you look at the floor votes, and you say, we're going to commission Benedict Arnold as Major General. And South Carolina said, they. But first vote by state was to strike out a proposed paragraph. 4 people voted yea, 4 people voted nay in South Carolina. And it was clear they did not want to be the deciding vote on this issue. So that's how they played the game, because the net sum was the official reporting of the vote of South Carolina. So you're like, you start reading some of these, you say, now you can figure out the little salacious BS. It's like, nope, we ain't voting. Our vote ain't counting. So anyway, they didn't always agree. So sometimes you can see there were 2 yays and 1 nay. So the answer was yay, but why did this guy have to vote nay? And then there were disagreements with northern states. So there were 5 times when, for the majority of votes, they voted in agreement. And then you see aye votes and nay votes for each person. Then you go on to volume 3, aye votes, nay votes, volume 4. This guy, he gets the gold star. He voted 288 times. I'm like, dang. Anyway. So that was 288 times that are disagreed with Northern States. Sorry. So volume 4, there's the people and their votes. There's Edmund Cody Burnett. There are the 4 volumes that I used. There's 3 of them in hard copy. There's the biographical directories of South Carolina, which are phenomenal, and journals of the Commons, journals of provincial congresses, and then there's online stuff. And I'm not taking any questions. Just kidding! Dang, went over.
Any questions? All right, we're going to take a...
You got questions?
Oh, Dave?
Thomas Lynch Jr. and Sr. I understood that Thomas Sr. was a member of the Continental Congress, but he did not attend at the end. And I understood that on the signers of the Declaration there you go. That they left a place for Thomas Lynch's name to be put in, and so that he could come. I mean, when he's better, I guess he'd get well. He would then sign it, but then he died before he could sign it. That's what I understand. Anything that.
So I know that his signature is on it. Declaration of Independence.
Junior is.
Oh yeah, Junior's the one that died. No, Senior was the one that died. So I got it backwards.
No, he said he died.
I'm just saying right now. I got it. So I don't know if Senior died. I did not know that.
We got another question.
Over here.
Yeah, this may seem to be an obscure point, but early in your slides, you showed where in the, well, I think before the First Continental Congress, they had these committees of public safety. And that seemed kind of odd to me because when you think about the definition of safety, it's the absence of injury, illness, or death. And the purpose, I think, of those committees was mainly to organize militia, probably. And, you know, militia, of course, may keep you safe from your enemies, but it does nothing to keep you safe from diseases, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that just kind of struck me as being an odd use of safety.
So its response is, every state did differently. Most of them created first committees of correspondence so that they communicate with each other. And they had virtually no power to do anything else except, here's what Massachusetts is doing, here's what Maryland is doing, here's what we want to know from you. Then they evolved into a committee of safety. And the committee of safety was mostly to defend the colony. And so some states did not act very swiftly on creating provincial congresses. They were still tied to their colonial congresses, and the governors wouldn't allow them to do things. I'll get to you, just hold on. The big key is that so if they could not get a provincial congress created, they increased the powers of the committees of safety to do all kinds of things so that they could communicate and what have you with each other. So they eventually all evolved into provincial congresses. And then each state, some states came up with committees of correspondence and committees of safety at the county level. And so they could communicate with each other to send their messages up to the provincial level. So it's very complicated. Yes, sir, Mr. Kim,